Hey there, my crows and friends. Welcome to yet another inquisitive and fun-filled episode of Q&A with Gray, brought to you by Botanical Interests. And I'm Gray, Texas master gardener, growing out of the Dallas, Texas area for over 20 years now. But you know what? Just consider me your botanical buddy on this gardening journey. And now, if you have questions, don't hesitate to drop them off in the comments. Or better yet, you can direct message me over on Instagram, and that's at Urban Gardening with Gray or at Botanical Interests. And now, our first question comes to us from at Amy Lors. Amy states, congratulations. I'm so excited. I have some questions of sorts. Do you have any tips for growing potatoes in your and my zone? You're in zone 8B, just like me. When do you plant them? I tried fall crops and they all rotted. I'd like to try again come spring. This summer, I want to grow sweet potatoes as ground cover in my pathways between my raised beds. Great choice. Do you prune your sweet potatoes to encourage tuber growth? Amy Loris, you've given us a lot to unpack today. All right, so the first part that I want to unpack is let's look at the fall potatoes that you attempted before, right? I have some follow-up questions for you. How were they planted? What means are you planting them? And then also, what's the drainage situation like? Because even though we're going to attempt again in the spring, and we should always, of course, dust ourselves off and try again, right? In gardening, we don't fail. We just we keep trying again and again and again, right? But I really would like to know, how you're planting them and what's the drainage situation like, so we don't have that same kind of rot situation happen again in the spring. Now, as far as when do we plant, right, out here in zone AB, around the Dallas, North Texas area and so forth, I go as far as my potatoes about last week in January, maybe mid-February, depending on what the weather looks like. Because with your seed potatoes, they can tolerate a little bit of frost. They just don't want to have extremely low temperatures in the soil. That's going to be your critical factor there. And I mean, plus, we definitely don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we have freezing temperatures in our soil, creating that ice. I mean, because that'll only exacerbate things and kind of put us back at square one where we were before. Now, as far as tips on growing potatoes, first one for you is, even though I know it's tempting to use your grocery store potatoes to create your seed potatoes, but I would go with a certified seed potato that's going to minimize your disease factor. Because whenever we're growing, if we can minimize any factors for disease right out the gates, that's always going to be my best avenue of approach. And now the next tip is going to come in the form of, how are you growing your potatoes, right? What way are you growing them? What means are you using? Because I've honestly grown potatoes in every way manageable or conceivable. I've grown potatoes in 5-gallon buckets. I've done traditional rows. I've done hilling methods. But by far, my favorite method of growing potatoes is going to be in a raised bed. Reason being is because when you're growing in a raised bed, one, you can maximize your space, right? So like a 4x4 raised bed is a great way of being able to grow your potatoes. Plus, you can capitalize on that hilling method to be able to still kind of stack your tubers up when you're placing those seed potatoes in the ground. Then the most important part is you're able to stay on top of your watering and your drainage. Because remember, your potatoes, as they're developing, they're still going to want to have that consistent, not soggy. They want to have that consistent moisture, because we, of course, like we said before, we don't want to get into that rot situation again. Now let's look at your second portion of your question when you're asking about the sweet potatoes. All right, so first and foremost, this is an awesome idea. Using sweet potatoes in your pathways as kind of like a living mulch is an awesome idea, because this incorporates the thought process of permaculture. So that's a great idea. But now, when it comes to whether or not I prune the leaves of my sweet potatoes to make more tubers, no, I don't do this at all. Because actually, that would be detrimental to the sweet potato plant and would drastically affect your yield if you did so. Because, I mean, not to bore you too much with the science, but essentially, the sweet potatoes take the energy from the sun and they convert it into sugars, and that's what's actually going to help create your tubers. So by pruning them back, you actually would be cutting off your yield. Here's my bit of advice for you. Instead of pruning them back too heavily, I would just redirect some of those vines as they start to vine out, as opposed to pruning them too hard. If you do need to harvest some of the leaves or do a little bit of pruning, I would do no more than 1/3 of the plant so that you're not really affecting your yield. Does that make sense? And please follow up with me. Let me know how the progress on this goes. I really am excited because I love the fact that you're incorporating permaculture. And now our next question comes to us from @Tracy Jeanette. Hey, Tracy. Love, send in a subscribe. I'm newish to gardening. Just bought my first house. Goodbye, apartment. Hello, land. Hello, land. I'm growing more and more excited as spring approaches. My questions have to do with more with seed planting. When is a great time to start germinating seeds to get past the last frost of the season? I'm in zone 5A, 5B. I'm anticipating April. You're absolutely right, April. How do I do cold stratification for the spring? Composting. Can I add my dog's poop to the compost? I know, ew. But I don't know if it's considered a natural fertilizer. I'm sure I'll have more pop up as I go, but I did turn on the notifications so I don't miss your Q&A. Thank you and congratulations. Well, Tracy, I just want to say subscribing and turning on your notifications. One, subscribing is a great way of supporting myself and the channel here. Plus, turning on those notifications, letting you know every time an episode comes out is a great way to make sure your questions get answered. So, Tracy Jeanette, thank you. I greatly appreciate you. But with that being said, let's break down all these questions that you have because you got some good ones here. All right, so it's really going to depend on what you're growing. That's what's going to be really the determining factor. I mean, for instance, if you're growing something like Oopsie Daisy Marigolds, right? Those you only need to actually start your germination process 2 to 4 weeks before your frost date. But if you're growing something like an onion, like a flat of Italy, you're going to be looking at about 10 to 12 weeks before the last frost date. So specifically in your situation, I'm going to kind of speak in generalities. You know what I mean? So we're talking about your slow growing plants, right? Like your onions, your leeks, your parsleys, and so forth. Those you want about 10 to 12 weeks of lead time before your last frost date because these are very slow growing plants. So you want to give them as much time so that they can establish themselves. But if we're looking at like brassicas or tomatoes, bell peppers, and so forth, those we want about 6 to 8 weeks of lead time. But now if we're looking at our herbs, our pumpkins, or squash, and so forth, those you only need about 2 to 4 weeks. But here's a tip for you. On the back of your seed packet, it's always going to tell you how much time you need to actually start those seeds. Now, for cold stratification, we actually, funny enough, we actually talked about this on last episode. But to reiterate, cold stratification, what we're trying to do is we're trying to duplicate what nature does already, right? So we can easily do that by taking our seeds, placing them in a moist paper towel, and placing them either in a Ziploc bag or in a clear container right in our refrigerator. But remember, key note, refrigerator. We're not trying to stick them in the freezer because we're not trying to freeze these seeds. All you're trying to do is you're trying to duplicate those same cool situations like we have in the winter. And now, as far as your turnaround time, you're looking at about a good 30 to 90 days, give or take, to plant whatever seed we're trying to germinate. But one key note, remember, we're not having to cold stratify every single seed that we have. It's only specific perennials that actually even need stratification. So make sure you look at the back of your seed packet and see if this is something that it actually requires. And of course, as always, you can just drop those questions about which plant needs stratification right there in the comments. Now, the next part of your question is an interesting one because this is a question that I've gotten a lot of times. Can I use the feces or the poop from my pet, whether it be my dog, my cat, and so forth, in my compost? No. And now the reason behind this is purely going to be based off of the spread of potential pathogens. I know we don't like to think of our dogs and our cats as being carnivores, but that's what they are. So any type of carnivores, waste or feces is going to have pathogens like E. coli, salmonella, hookworm, and so forth. You don't want that around any crop that you're going to be potentially eating or feeding to your family. So don't use your pet waste as a means of being able to compost, because one, the compost is not going to get to the temperature that can cook off those potential pathogens. What you want to do is stick to your herbivores. That's going to be your cow, your horse, your chicken, your rabbit, because their waste and their manure can totally be used in the garden, and we don't get that risk of potential pathogens being spread. But now, when it comes to using your manures in your compost and so forth, make sure that it's been cured for about 90 to 120 days. Because when we use fresh manures, a lot of the times they can end up burning our crops, meaning that they would essentially be too rich in nitrogen, and it could end up burning out our crops. So make sure that it's something that's been fully cured first before you expose it to your garden. And our next question comes to us from @NurtureNature2861. Congratulations. I love strawberries. When should I start them or start looking for seedlings? Very good question. So when it comes to strawberries, yes, you can totally start them from seed. But I'm going to tell you, it's going to be very slow going. See, reason being is that strawberries need at least 12 to 14 weeks for lead time as far as trying to get those seeds to grow. They're very slow growing. Plus, factoring in the whole fact that the seeds need to be cold stratified, like we were talking about before. So you're looking at a very slow growing seed. And that's why the advice that I'm going to give you is one that both myself as well as commercial growers go with bare roots. Bare roots are essentially strawberry plants that are about 2 years old, that are dormant, that you can easily wake up and actually plant in the ground and get strawberries that season. So while it can be done, I don't know. I mean, it's going to take a lot of patience. I mean, you may have that kind of patience. I don't. That's why I always go with bare root strawberry plants to get that instant gratification that I need. Because I grow a lot of strawberries and my kids love them. And I don't have that kind of patience to wait around. But by all means, it definitely can be done. If you'd like to know more about strawberries to maybe plant in your zone specifically, make sure to drop me a question in the comments, and I can maybe recommend something that might grow well in your zone. @Lanita6979 asks, top methods to sell plants and trees quickly. Great question. And I'm going to say online. We are blessed with living in a digital age where just about everything is right at our fingertips. I mean, heck, you're probably watching this video right now on your phone, right? We have the world at our fingertips. Why not use it to capitalize upon? I mean, because yes, you can do some pop-up events or something like that, but the quickest means is definitely going to be online. So first place I would say is maybe check out Facebook Marketplace. There is a cornucopia of people out there selling all kind of things imaginable, and plants definitely are one of them. So Facebook Marketplace is my first recommendation. You also have means like Instagram, as well as Craigslist and Etsy and so forth. So I would say if you're looking for a quick turnaround on trying to sell some plants, go online, use what's available. Because by selling online, I mean, one, you're getting those local eyes, but you're also getting those national eyes on your plants that you're trying to sell. And frankly, a lot of people that would be willing to either pay the shipping or to just drive by and, coordinate a pickup. So I would say the best means of trying to sell plants or trees quickly would be by going online. @JT Gillanders asks, what seed companies do you recommend for Zone 7B gardeners? Botanical Interest. Yes, 100% Botanical Interest. I mean, truly, I do love their seeds, but they cater to growers in zones 4 through zones 10. So if you're in the United States and you're looking for seeds to grow, Botanical Interest is the way to go. @JT Gillanders, I feel like that one's kind of a layup. I think you were hooking me up with that one. I appreciate you. All right, on to our next question here. Let's see. @Conarch8177 says, Gray, if I started non-dormant fig cuttings in a grow tent over winter, do I need to give them a dormant period before spring in order to get them to fruit? It's a good one. I don't think so. I don't think you do. And I'm gonna walk you down the logic train of what my thoughts are. So when we're thinking about our fruit trees, they do have a period in which they go dormant, right? Where essentially they go to sleep. But this is like a genetic mutation or an adaptation. That's the word we're looking for. This is an adaptation that comes out of survival. This is not a requirement. This is something that the plant has developed to essentially, it says, whoa, the temperatures are way too cold right now. I can't have any tender new growth because essentially they'll freeze off or what have you. And they have adapted in such a way where they are trying to preserve themselves. And once the temperatures warm up, then they can start their new growth. They can start their fruiting and so forth. So with that being said, I'm going to say, no, you shouldn't have to make your figs go dormant. Since you have them in a grow tent and these cuttings, I hope they've rooted on you and they're starting their growth period. When spring comes, let them grow. Let them grow as much as possible. I would say get as much vegetative growth as you possibly can out of them. Because that first year, you definitely want to try to get as much vegetative growth as possible so that when it is time to fruit, potentially that next year, you'll have a better possibility of fruiting. I say what your real challenge is going to be, though, is going to be your hardening off period. That's going to be the real challenge of what you should be looking for. Because think about it. You've created this ideal scenario for the plant in this grow tent that has the perfect temperature and everything. You're slowly going to need to have to harden off this plant so that it can get acclimated to the regular climate once it's time to do so. It's just like starting seeds indoors, right? So indoors, we have an ambient temperature of about 72 to 74 degrees, but spring comes around and you want to bring those crops outside. Well, we know that we can't just stick them out there and hope for the best. We have to, as my wife likes to say, have the plants have play dates where they go outside for a couple of hours, get used to that wind, get used to that sun. Temperatures may be a little cooler, maybe a little warmer. You're trying to acclimate them. That's what's going to be your challenge, to acclimate those fig cuttings to your natural environment. But as far as trying to force a dormant period for the figs, you won't need to do that at all. Get as much vegetative growth as you possibly can that first year. And even if the plant starts to fruit, I would say pinch those flowers and those fruit off so you can really get that vegetative growth so the plant can really establish itself first. That would be my advice to you. Great question, dude. I love it. At Cynthia Roberts, VAZ, ask, hey, Gray, I'm here in Houston, 9B. Planted broccoli seeds early November. I have a big, gorgeous plant, but no signs of heading. What's the timing on this? First of all, love Houston. Visit often. I should be down there in April to go to a plant show. But your broccoli is a cool season crop. And given the climate out in Houston, because I am familiar with it, more than likely in November, you didn't probably start getting that cooler weather to about maybe second, third week of December. So that's what's going to be your ultimate factor. You need to have what's called a vernalization period. You need to have that cooler weather in that plant so that you can actually get those buds and those florets to start developing. And when it comes to vernalization, you're really looking for a cooling period or a cooling temperature of about 60 degrees. That's what we're looking for. That's that ideal sweet zone. That's that switch for the plant to be like, boop, hey, it's cold enough. Let me go ahead and start doing my thing. So with that being said, given our time of year now and the cooling temperatures that we've had now, you being down there in Houston, I'm pretty sure that you've got enough of the cooler temperatures where you should, if not have, you should definitely have bud formation and you should have florets. Do me a favor, let me know in the comments what those heads look like out there, because I would love to know. But I really think you should have florets going right now. If not, we can troubleshoot and figure it out together and see why you haven't started this process. But let me know. And our next question comes from @SarahMills01865. Hi, Gray. I have raised beds. I like to supplement last year's dirt with fresh bags of 2-year-old organic cow poop compost from a local farm, about 100 pounds per bed. Whew, that's a lot. On overcommitted years, I top dress. On years with more time, everything comes out. Kitchen compost goes on the bottom, and a mixture of last year's dirt and new cow compost goes on top. This year, I will probably have more time. My dad is in hospice now. I'm sorry to hear that, my friend. So my question is, what's right or wrong with my garden bed, fluffing and refreshing? In 2020, I had some of the best weather and was able to give away over 400 pounds of tomatoes. Signed, the Tomato Lady of Pawtucketfield. Well, first and foremost, my friend, I'm sorry to hear about your father. My heart goes out to you, my friend. But let's look at what we're doing right or wrong in this situation. So first and foremost, the addition of 100 pounds of organic 2-year-old cured cow manure and compost is great for your garden. I mean, you are adding so much organic matter to the bed structure that you're going to have great water retention. You're going to have great nutrient cycling. So, I mean, this is a great thing that you're doing. And your more timing method, or your deep soil refreshing that you're doing, this is great as well, because by doing this, you're actually preventing, quote, soil compaction, which can easily happen once we have our beds established and, all that organic matter starts to break down. You start to get a little bit of compaction. But since you're deep refreshing your soil, this is actually a great thing as well. And then plus, once you're putting your newer layers up on the top, you can easily amend those beds how you need to. So again, great job. And now that method of adding the kitchen compost down to the bottom of your beds is actually great as well. I mean, you're 3 for 3, because with adding your kitchen compost, it's not fully broken down yet. So by placing it down at the bottom allows it to fully break down and be readily available for the plants. And then plus, by burying it so deep, essentially you're not ringing the dinner bell for any potential pests, because they'll smell it and they'll want to come dig up your beds. So I love this approach as well. The only problem I would foresee in anything that you're doing right now potentially could be your compost source. And that's going to be the cow manure that you're using. While it is a great source of nutrients, by using it every year, you might end up getting into a situation where you might start having a buildup of either phosphorus or a buildup of potassium as well. So what I would recommend is kind of rotate it out. Maybe go something plant-based or a leaf mold or something like that on your odd years. That way you have a more of an even distribution of your nutrient cycle. Now, the only other tweak that I would maybe recommend is the refreshing of the soil. I would actually, and just my opinion, I would recommend maybe refreshing the soil every 2 to 3 years. When you're talking about completely taking it all out and then, refreshing it, I would do that about every 2 to 3 years. And my logic behind this is that, we're establishing a lot of great protozoa, microorganisms, and fungi in that soil. And every time that we're disturbing it, we're completely disrupting that whole soil food web, so to speak. So I would give it a little time to really establish itself before we completely just reboot the system every time. But I mean, so far, the fact that you were able to give away 400 pounds of tomatoes, I'm in awe of you, my friend. That is pretty awesome. I appreciate what you're doing. All right, now our next set of questions comes to us from Instagram. All right, and the first one being at Corinne Doesn't Want To. Corinne asks, how do you start asparagus? My grandpa had fields of it when I was young. I wanted to add it to the garden, but didn't get around to it. Unfortunately, I messed up by procrastinating. Hey, I'm right there with you. Procrastinating is my biggest nemesis. My grandpa passed away a month ago, and so I can't go to him for advice. I'm sorry to hear that. Any help would be appreciated. Good luck with your new show. Thank you, my friend. I greatly appreciate you. Well, when it comes to asparagus, first and foremost, again, I'm sorry to hear about your grandpa. I know he more than likely meant a lot to you, and my heart goes out to you, my friend. But when it comes to asparagus, it's really going to be on mindset. That's your first avenue of approach. Remember, when you're growing asparagus, it's a long-term game. I mean, no joke. It is an investment. I mean, you plant once and you are harvesting asparagus for the next 20 years. But with that being said, those first 2 years after planting, no harvesting whatsoever, because you really want that plant to establish itself and really build up that root system. Now, here are some non-negotiables. You have to get good sun. I mean, we want a good solid 8 hours of direct sunlight for the asparagus. Plus, another non-negotiable, you have to have good, well-draining soil. It does not like to sit in soggy soil whatsoever. So in this situation, my first bit of advice is going to be definitely having a dedicated raised bed to just asparagus growth. And now my next tip is going to gravitate to your planting method. While you can totally grow asparagus from seed, I'm going to give you the same advice that I gave our strawberry grower from before. I would start my asparagus from 1-year-old bare root stock. That's what I would go with, because you're already shortening your time frame as far as growth, and you're not waiting for those seeds to germinate and then develop. So I would start with some bare root stock first. That's what I would begin planting with. Now, as far as our planting method, I would start off by trenching our beds about a good foot deep or so, and then planting my spears in the trench itself about 18 to 20 inches apart or so, and then only really filling in about 2 to 3 inches of soil right there on those roots. And then as the spears start to continuously grow throughout our summer season, I would just continuously add soil to it while the growth is taking place. But now this is the most important part, okay? That first 2 years of growth, what's going to happen is, and of course, you've probably seen this when you saw all of your grandpa's asparagus. You're going to see the ferns start to grow. It's going to turn into this big, beautiful fern. And then as the season progresses and you get into like the fall and so forth, the ferns will die back. You cut back those ferns, and then just let that cycle continue. Now, as that first 2 years is going, we want to make sure that we are top dressing our beds with fresh premium compost at the beginning of every spring, so that we are feeding them appropriately. But now, third year is where the fun begins, because that's when we can finally start to harvest. What I would do in this situation, and what I'm going to do in the next couple of years, is that after that first 4 to 6 weeks or so, and we have spears that are growing up, that are about 6 to 8 inches in length, we can go ahead and start harvesting. Now we want to cut off harvesting when they start to get too thin, when they start to get like the width of your pinky or maybe smaller than that of a pencil or so. You want to kind of cut back on harvesting and allow them to fern out once again. And then you start the cycle of rinse and repeating every single year. So Corinne, you and I, we're going to be doing some asparagus together. And again, from Instagram, we have at Janine19. Janine asked the question, have you ever grown black-eyed peas from the grocery store? Yes. It's an awesome way of being able to get black-eyed pea seeds. They're inexpensive. I mean, they're about $1.50, $2 for a whole bag of them. Yes, I have definitely grown them this way. And it's a great way of being able to cut costs and grow something that you love to grow. So yes, growing black-eyed peas or any of your legumes or beans that you can get from a grocery store, this is a great way to get seeds. So definitely. But wait, I feel like I should clarify. We're talking about dried beans. We're not talking about frozen or canned. I know many of you are experienced growers, but yes, we're not talking about the canned or the frozen stuff. We're talking about dried beans. Yes, this is definitely a great way of being able to grow something that you love. So I say go for it. All right, now our next set of questions come from TikTok. First one being at Pyrotechnician Tool B. Just bought old farmland in North Carolina. Grounds red clay but sandy. What will be a good way to make the soil suitable for seed starting and raised beds? This is a good question. All right. So first bit of advice is, I would say start off with a soil test. What I want you to do is reach out to your North Carolina Department of Agriculture, if not your local ag extension, and see about conducting a soil test. Because with a soil test, they can tell you what your pH currently is. They can tell you what your how much nutrients you already have present in your soil. And plus, they can actually give you recommendations on how much lime, how much phosphate, how much potash to actually add to your soil to get it to that seed starting level that you want it to be at. So first, that would be my first avenue of approach is reaching out to the experts that are familiar with your growing zone and test the soil first. And now my second bit of advice is don't try to eat the whole elephant. I mean, I know you have this premium old farmland that's probably going to be awesome, but don't try to eat the whole elephant. Don't try to bite off more than you can chew. If you get what I'm saying, at pyrotechnician, yeah, do it in small chunks. I mean, because I think in your question, you even alluded to the fact that you wanted to do raised beds. That's what I would go with. I would go with a sample size, a smaller size, a manageable enough size of the land, and use that to do my raised beds in. Because when we're going with raised beds, we are bringing outside source of soil in. We're adding in compost. We're adding in that organic layer. Because seeing as how you have that red clay and you have sand, you definitely want to add in some organic matter to that, to break up that consistency, right? Because we know that clay is going to retain a lot of water. That water does not want to pass through clay. Now the sand is pretty good, but the combination of the clay and the sand together would almost make like a concrete consistency. So that's why we want to add in that organic matter by adding in compost or fresh manure, or not fresh manure, excuse me, cured manure. We want to add those things in so we can add in that organic matter to the equation. Now, with that being said, you can still use some of that native soil. Of course, once we've done that soil test to know where your nutrient levels are and where your pH is at, right? You can still use some of that native soil. I would just sift through it so we can get as much aeration as we possibly can in that soil, and mix that in with the organic matter and the compost that we're going to be adding into our beds. And now I know that Jacques in the garden, and I want to say Kevin over at Epic Gardening has done several videos talking about the lasagna method on how to fill your raised beds. One piece of advice, though, I want to make sure to give to you is when we get these raised beds in place, let's make sure that we don't put down any plastic. We don't put down any like weed barrier or anything like that, because by doing so, you would cut off access for your night crawlers, for your worms to be able to get up in there and aerate out your soil. Then plus you can get a lot of water. The beauty of raised beds is they're excellent at drainage, right? But if you're putting plastic, you're putting a weed barrier or something like that, you are cutting off that ability to be able to drain. So just make sure, and if you have questions, of course, if you have questions about how to fill your raised beds or how to put them in place, feel free to drop them down in the comments, and I'll take care of you. But definitely, I would highly recommend checking out at Jacques in the Garden or at the main flagship over at Epic Gardening to see how to get that lasagna method down really packed for your raised beds. And now, as far as your long-term overall like soil management on the entire property, right? I would say continue to add in organic matter when it's financially feasible, right? Because I don't know exactly how big your plot is. I mean, if we're talking an acre or less than an acre, maybe it's something that's manageable. But if it's 10, 15 acres, that can get insurmountable really fast. So, add in the organic matter as you can and can afford. Then, of course, consider cover crops as well. Cover crops added to that soil can help break it up and help feed that soil and get it to that ideal place that you want it to be. And you know what? Once you get the results back from your soil test, and you don't have to disclose the exact information with me, but I would love to know what you find out about this North Carolina farmland that you have. So if you would like to email me directly or DM me over at Instagram, and that's at Urban Gardening with Gray, or at Botanical Interest, I would love to know more about exactly what your findings are for this farmland. And congratulations, by the way. I don't think I said that first. I should have led with that. Congratulations, the fact that you were able to purchase some old farmland in North Carolina. That is amazing. Now, interestingly enough, our next question is from @Jess, and it's also about soil building methods and raised beds as well. So, @Jess question states, I bought a plot with awful soil. Favorite above ground bed layering and soil building tips. All right, so I'm going to start off with one that we've heard a lot about, right? When we're talking about beds, we often talk about culture, right? Where you do like a lasagna method, where you're placing your larger organic matter at the bottom, like your sticks, branches, and so forth. Then you come back and you add in a little bit of compost on top of that. Then from there, you start adding maybe like your leaf mold or your leaf debris, crunched up, dried leaf mold and leaf debris. The more broken down, the better. Then we go in with our top layer of soil. Now, the caveat with this culture type of method, this lasagna style method, is that by doing so, the larger organic matter, those sticks and those branches, they're going to take a longer time to break down. And I've had a lot of folks tell me that, that first 1 to 2 years of using these beds don't really get a lot of production out of them. Well, that's the reason being is because you have a lot of things that are decomposing in that bed all at once. You have your sticks, you have your mulch, you have your leaves. All those things are breaking down. And as they're breaking down, those nutrients are not available for the plants. They're only available once they have fully broken down. So what I would recommend instead to get an instant gratification, because let's face it, as gardeners, we're always looking for that instant gratification, right? What I would recommend is actually adding in as much already broken down organic matter that we can in that bed, about a third based on volume for your bed, right? I would say add in your cured cow manure compost, right? Add in your leaf mold that's already broken down, your premium compost, something that's already had decomposed. That's what we want to add to our bed so we can get that instant gratification. I mean, you can still do the lasagna method. There's nothing wrong with that, but just do realize it is going to take a little bit of time before that bed really starts producing like you want. Does that make sense? All right, let's keep it rolling. We have @Rockstar. I would love some tips on growing large squash and cabbage and kale and keeping pests away. Thank you. All right, Rockstar, you got a rock star of a question. So let's look at, all right, first thing I'm going to say is I would recommend let's compost heavily. I mean, we want a heavy amount of deep compost in your growing meats, in your growing bed, or if you're growing in ground. Let's get that compost in there good, because you want to get those things kind of cooking so that you have a lot of food for those, essentially all of these leafy plants to be able to generate really quickly. Next, respect your spacing. I know sometimes you're like, I can just put all these in here. No, definitely respect your spacing when it comes to these plants. Like for instance, your squash, you're going to want to make sure you have about 6 feet in between your squash plants, because you really want to give them time to really vine out and really travel. I mean, we're talking about large squash. We didn't specify if we're talking about like a summer squash or a winter squash or what have you. But you really want to give them enough space so that they can sprawl out, especially if it's the vining type. When it comes to our cabbage, we want about 24 inches in between our cabbage plants. Again, we don't want them too close together because we want to give them space to be able to spread out. Well, not so much with a cabbage. Head of cabbages doesn't really need to spread out. But you also don't want plants right on top of each other so that they're in competition for nutrition from one another. And now when it comes to our kale, we don't really need to, we still need to give adequate spacing, but what's really going to be the driving factor for it is, one, you want a very high nitrogen fertilizer to fertilize them with. Make sure, and this goes for all plants, that you get a nice even distribution of both your fertilizers and your watering, right? Even kill. Secondly, when it comes to your squash, not your squash. Secondly, when it comes to your kale, when you start getting that leaf development, make sure you harvest fairly quickly so that you can stimulate the plant to start to grow more. The more you harvest, the more it will produce. Matter of fact, you actually just reminded me, I have to go out and harvest some of my dinosaur kale right now. So I'll be doing that in just a moment. Now, your next question was in regards to pest control. All right. So each one of the plants we talked about, your cabbage, your kale, and your squash, they all can get hit by pests. And with the spring right around the corner, let me break that down for you. So now let's look at our squash and our cabbage first, right? Because there are two pests that are the bane of my existence as a gardener, and I'm probably sure are for you as well. And that's going to be your squash vine borers, that's the SVBs, and that's going to be your cabbage moths. Both of these insects are in moth form. All right. The squash vine borer has a very distinctive, like red color in its pattern. You're going to have to be on the lookout for those. Watch for the moths because those moths lay their eggs. Same with your cabbage moths, right? They lay their eggs down on the soil. Once the eggs hatch, then the larvae borers go into your plant and just completely destroy your garden. So in this type of situation, what I would recommend is floating row covers. If you can get some kind of bird netting or something like that, something that's going to keep those moths out, that would be your best avenue of approach. Now, when it comes to your squash, of course, you're going to want to remove it during the daylight hours so that you can still get pollination for your squash or either practice hand pollinating. But by putting up those floating row covers, that I really feel is going to be your best avenue of approach. And then now my next recommendation is going to actually be a pesticide. And it's a pesticide by the name of BT. That's what we commonly call it, BT, but it stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. Very challenging for me to say with the Texas accent. But yeah, so BT is specifically a bacteria that affects squash vine borers, cabbage moths, as well as the caterpillars that might even affect your kale as well. It is completely safe for humans. It does not affect us at all, but you can actually spray this as a protective barrier for your plants. But there's a caveat to that. It only works on direct contact. So when you're spraying it directly on those caterpillars, when you're spraying it on those larvae and those moths and so forth, that's when it's the most effective. I would say have that kind of as your second layer of defense. And it's sold in most garden centers. You can find it in your big box stores. It's readily available. So for larger growth, we want to respect spacing. We want to give proper nutrition. And we want to even waterly. When it comes to our pest control, we want to provide as many barriers, as many mechanical barriers as we can first, right? So we're talking about those row covers, and then of course, we can go in with our chemical means. That would be your best avenue of approach, and then we just go from there because prevention is the best weapon you can have in your defense instead of catching it after fact and skating uphill essentially. Does that make sense? All right, and now we've got at Collie. And at Collie states, the older I get, the more I like raised beds. I'm right there with you. But mine are high. I'm still not good at knowing what I can grow in them successfully. You present a very good point. Yeah, when you have the higher raised beds, it can be a little bit of a challenge because what if you plant something in there that's going to get too tall and it cuts off your access as far as trying to be able to harvest, right? All right, so let me break it down to you like this. So I would say, okay, let's look at it from which plants are going to benefit the most from a deep, high raised bed, right? That's going to be your heavy feeders and your deep rooted plants. So we're looking at plants like your tomatoes, right? We know that tomatoes like a very deep root system if they can, and they're going to be heavy feeders as well. I would highly consider using tomatoes and something like that because they're going to benefit from that depth. And now when it comes to the height of the raised bed, I would say let's use tomato cages and then let's keep our pruning to a point where these tomatoes aren't vining up too tall. I would definitely go with an indeterminate tomato because your indeterminate, even if it gets too tall over your tomato cage, you can easily have that vine drop back down so that you still have access to be able to harvest your tomatoes, right? Now, you could go with something like potatoes as well, depending on how high this bed is. I mean, I think we had talked about potatoes earlier in this episode, right? Potatoes do well in raised beds because you can give them that even moisture that they need, and you can feed them adequately, and then plus you can easily be able to do your hilling method inside that raised bed. The only problem I do foresee, depending on how tall this raised bed is, it might be a challenge when it comes to harvest time. You might have to climb in there, pull your potatoes out. But that's one thought. And then you have your deeper rooted crops, right? Your tap roots, like your carrots, who like to grow long and straight, or parsnips, or even some varieties of your radishes. They would all benefit fairly well from having a deep bed like that. Then you can also look at your lettuces and spinaches as well, because by having a bed that's so high, it actually might make harvesting really easy, just kind of cut and go, so to speak. So that's an avenue of approach worth looking into. But now there are some plants that I would completely stay away from in having a bed that's so high. I'd completely stay away from large sprawling plants like your watermelons, any varieties of your melons, your pumpkins, some of your versions of like your winter squash that really vine out. One, because they'll just completely take over the area and it'll really cut off your avenue of approach of really trying to get there. Secondly, any top heavy feeder plants, right? So like your corns, you don't want them up that high. I mean, they would love the depth of that soil, but it's going to be way too high for you to be able to access. As well as pole beans and such. No, I would just stay away from those entirely. And then last but not least, any of your perennial herbs or perennial plants, like for instance, your asparagus, like we were mentioning before, right? Or rhubarb or horseradish or anything like that, because we're looking at 10 years plus and 20 years or so on, your asparagus. They're going to be there forever. So I would have them in a smaller, easier access bed. Those would be your best avenue of approach. Guess what? It's that time. Yeah, I know. I've been having a blast sitting here answering all of your gardening questions, and I appreciate you just kind of hanging out with me here. But it is that time. That's it for us here on Q&A with Gray. But if you have additional questions, like I told you before, make sure you drop them in the comments. That way I can get to them as soon as possible and possibly even feature you on the next episode. And hey, now for great seed recommendations and growing tips, make sure to give my friends at Botanical Interests a follow. And if you're looking for additional gardening help and just want to hang out with me a little bit more, I'd greatly appreciate a follow as well. And that's at Urban Gardening with Gray. But in the meantime, I'll leave you with this. May your weeds pull easy and may your blossoms forever bloom. It's been amazing speaking with you. Talk to you again real soon.